The moment Faye Whitmore felt the icy water surge over her boots, she knew she had made a fatal mistake by trying to cross the swollen creek during spring thaw, and now the current dragged her downstream like a rag doll, while her mare screamed and fought against the flood somewhere behind her. The world became a churning nightmare of brown water and debris, branches slashing at her face, her heavy skirts tangling around her legs like anchors pulling her down into the freezing depths. She gasped for air whenever her head broke the surface, her lungs burning with the effort, her fingers scrabbling uselessly against rocks that slipped away before she could find purchase. Faye had been traveling from Sacramento to Sonora, California in March of 1878, carrying documents from her father's law office to a mining company that desperately needed them before their claim expired. At 22 years old, she had insisted she could make the journey alone, confident in her riding skills and her knowledge of the territory. But the unusually warm weather had accelerated the mountain snowmelt, and what should have been a manageable stream crossing had transformed into a death trap. Within moments of her horse stepping into the current, the water pulled her under again, and this time she could not find the surface. Her chest tightened with panic as the current tumbled her over and over, her sense of direction completely lost in the murky chaos. Just as her vision began to darken at the edges, strong hands seized her arm with an iron grip, and suddenly she was being hauled upward with tremendous force. She broke the surface coughing and sputtering, immediately grabbed around the waist by someone who held her with one powerful arm while apparently controlling a horse with the other. Through the water streaming down her face, she caught a glimpse of a dark horse swimming strongly against the current. Its nostrils flared wide as it fought toward the bank. "Hold still," a deep male voice commanded near her ear. "Do not fight me, or we will both drown." Faye had no strength left to fight anyone. She went limp in his grasp, trusting this stranger completely because she had no other choice. The horse beneath them surged forward with renewed effort, and after what felt like an eternity, but was probably less than a minute, she felt the animal's hooves strike solid ground. The horse lunged up the muddy bank, nearly losing its footing twice before reaching level ground 20 feet from the raging water. Her rescuer dismounted with her still in his arms, carrying her several more yards away before setting her down on a patch of winter-brown grass. Faye collapsed immediately, her legs unable to support her weight, and began coughing up what felt like half the creek. Her whole body shook with cold and shock, her teeth chattering so violently she bit her tongue. "Easy now," the man said, kneeling beside her and turning her onto her side as she continued to cough. "Get it all out. You took in a lot of water." When she could finally breathe without choking, Faye rolled onto her back and looked up at her rescuer for the first time. He was perhaps 26 or 27, with dark hair plastered to his head from the water, and eyes the color of storm clouds that studied her with intense concern. His jaw was strong and shadowed with stubble, and even soaked and muddy, he had a presence that commanded attention. Water dripped from his wool coat and leather vest, and she realized he must have ridden directly into the flood to reach her. "Thank you," she managed to whisper through her chattering teeth. "You saved my life. Can you move your legs, your arms?" he asked, his hands hovering near her, as if ready to check for broken bones, but hesitant to touch her without permission. Faye tested each limb carefully. Everything hurt, and she could feel the sting of numerous cuts and scrapes, but nothing seemed broken. "I think I'm all right, just very cold. We need to get you warm immediately. You are going into shock." He stood and whistled sharply, and his dark horse trotted over obediently, despite its obvious exhaustion. From his saddlebag, the man pulled out a wool blanket that was mercifully dry. He shook it out and wrapped it around her shoulders, then lifted her again as if she weighed nothing. "What are you doing?" Faye asked, though she lacked the strength to protest. "There is a line shack about a mile from here. I was heading there when I saw you go into the water." He set her on his horse, then swung up behind her, keeping one arm around her waist to hold her steady. "We need to get you out of those wet clothes and next to a fire, or you will not survive the afternoon, regardless of my pulling you from the creek." Faye knew he was right, though the impropriety of the situation would have scandalized her mother. But propriety meant nothing when facing death from exposure. She leaned back against his solid chest, drawing what little warmth she could from his body as he urged his horse into a steady walk. The animal was clearly tired from its heroic swim, but responded gamely to its rider's commands. "My mare," Faye said suddenly, remembering. "She was still in the water when I went under." If she got out, she will head for shelter and food. If she did not, he left the sentence unfinished, but his meaning was clear. What is your name? Faye Whitmore. I was traveling to Sonora with documents for my father. Ethan Zane, he said. I have been working cattle in the high country, bringing down strays before the full thaw makes the upper ranges impassable. I saw the creek this morning and knew it would be dangerous, but I did not expect to see anyone foolish enough to try crossing it. His tone was matter of fact rather than judgmental, but Faye still felt defensive. It did not look that bad when I approached it. The water rose so quickly once my mare stepped in. The snowmelt is unpredictable this year. We had a harder winter than usual, and now this warm spell is releasing it all at once. Ethan guided his horse around a stand of pine trees, and Faye saw a small cabin ahead, weathered wood blending into the landscape. This shack belongs to the ranch I work for. We use it during spring and fall roundups. He dismounted and lifted her down, keeping his arm around her when her legs wobbled. Together they made it to the door, which he kicked open since his hands were occupied with supporting her. The interior was sparse but clean, with a stone fireplace, a narrow bunk built into one wall, a rough table with 2 chairs, and shelves holding basic supplies. Ethan deposited her on the bunk and immediately set about building a fire in the fireplace, using kindling and logs from a box beside the hearth. His movements were efficient and practiced, and within minutes flames were crackling to life. Only then did he turn his attention back to her. You need to remove those wet clothes, he said bluntly. I will turn my back and tend to my horse, but you must get out of them now. There should be some old clothes on the shelf that belong to one of the ranch hands. They will be too large, but they will be dry. Faye nodded, too cold to argue about modesty. Ethan went back outside, leaving the door slightly ajar. With shaking hands, she began the arduous process of undoing the many buttons and hooks of her traveling dress, her fingers so numb she could barely make them work. The heavy wool skirt and petticoats clung to her skin, and she had to struggle to peel them away. Her corset was soaked through, the laces swollen with water, and nearly impossible to loosen. She was crying with frustration by the time she managed to free herself from the undergarment, her entire body shaking uncontrollably. Her chemise and drawers were equally wet, and she stripped them off as well, wrapping herself in the dry blanket Ethan had given her, while she made her way on unsteady legs to the shelf he had mentioned. She found a man's wool shirt, canvas trousers with a rope belt, and thick socks. Everything was indeed far too large, but she managed to roll up the sleeves and pant legs enough to be functional. "Are you decent?" Ethan called from outside. "Yes," Faye answered, her voice still shaky. He came back inside, closing the door firmly against the cold wind that had picked up. His sharp eyes assessed her quickly, and he nodded with apparent satisfaction. "Better. Sit by the fire while I change as well." He moved to the opposite corner of the room, keeping his back to her as he stripped off his own wet clothing. Faye tried not to look, but she could not help noticing the broad expanse of his shoulders and back as he pulled on a dry shirt, his muscles moving beneath tanned skin. She felt heat rise to her cheeks that had nothing to do with the fire, and quickly looked away, focusing on holding her hands toward the flames. When Ethan was dressed in dry clothes, he hung their wet things on a rope strung across one corner of the cabin, clearly meant for this purpose. Then he rummaged through the supplies and produced a battered coffee pot and tin of grounds. "Coffee will help warm you from the inside," he said, filling the pot from a water barrel near the door and setting it on a metal grate over the flames. They sat in silence for a few minutes, Faye gradually feeling sensation return to her extremities in painful tingles. Now that the immediate crisis was over, she became acutely aware of her situation. She was alone in a remote cabin with a man she had just met, wearing his clothes, with no horse and no idea where her own belongings were. By all social conventions, she was thoroughly compromised. As if reading her thoughts, Ethan said quietly, "I give you my word that you are safe with me, Miss Whitmore. I will not take advantage of this situation." "I know," Faye said, and was surprised to realize she meant it. Something in his steady gaze and honorable actions told her he was a man of integrity. "You risked your life to save mine. I trust you." He looked at her for a long moment, something flickering in his gray eyes that made her heart skip. Then he turned his attention to the coffee, which had begun to boil. He poured 2 cups and handed her one, their fingers brushing briefly in the exchange. Even that small contact sent a jolt of awareness through her. Tell me about these documents you were carrying, Ethan said, settling into one of the chairs and stretching his long legs toward the fire. Must have been important for you to travel alone. Faye wrapped both hands around the tin cup, savoring its warmth. My father is a lawyer in Sacramento. The Consolidated Mining Company in Sonora needed papers filed before the end of the month, or they would lose their claim to a disputed section of their mine. Father has been ill with pneumonia and could not travel himself. My brother is away at university in San Francisco, so I volunteered to make the journey. Your father let you travel alone? Ethan's tone suggested he found this surprising. He did not want to, but I convinced him I would be fine. I have made the trip before, though never during spring thaw. She took a sip of the strong, bitter coffee and grimaced slightly. The documents were in my saddlebag. If my mare is lost, then everything my father worked on is gone, and the mining company will lose their claim. Where exactly did you go into the water? Ethan asked, his expression thoughtful. Faye described the location as best she could, mentioning landmarks she had passed before the crossing. Ethan nodded slowly. I know that spot. The creek bends there and creates a wide pool before narrowing again. If your mare made it out, there is a chance she would have headed downstream rather than upstream, because the bank is easier there. Tomorrow morning, if the water has receded any, I will ride down and look for her. Tomorrow? We are staying here tonight? The impropriety of it hit her again, though she knew there was no alternative. The sun will set in a few hours, and I will not risk the trails in darkness, especially with my horse as exhausted as he is. Duke saved both our lives today. He needs rest and grain, which I have here. Ethan met her eyes steadily. I know this is not proper, Miss Whitmore, but I see no other option. I can sleep on the floor if it makes you more comfortable. No, that is not necessary. You should take the bunk. You are the one who nearly drowned trying to save me. Faye set down her coffee cup and wrapped the blanket more tightly around her shoulders. I am already so far beyond proper that one more transgression will make little difference. Your reputation does not have to suffer if we are discreet. No one needs to know you spent the night here. Someone will know. I will have to explain what happened to the documents and where I have been. Faye felt tears prick her eyes again, this time from frustration and worry rather than cold. My father trusted me with this responsibility, and I failed. You did not fail. You encountered a dangerous situation that would have killed most people. The fact that you survived shows courage and strength. Ethan leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his gaze intense. And we do not know yet that the documents are lost. Let me search tomorrow before you give up hope. There was something in his voice, a conviction and determination that made her want to believe him. Faye nodded slowly, allowing herself to feel a small spark of hope. The afternoon passed slowly. Ethan went outside periodically to check on Duke and bring in more firewood. He produced some jerky and hardtack from the cabin stores, which they ate for supper along with more coffee. As darkness fell, Faye found herself watching him in the firelight, studying the strong lines of his face and the capable way he moved. He was unlike the men she knew in Sacramento, the lawyers and businessmen who spent their days in offices and courtrooms. Ethan had a rugged self-sufficiency about him, a quiet confidence born from living and working in harsh country. How long have you been a cowboy? She asked, breaking the comfortable silence that had fallen between them. Since I was 14. My parents died of scarlet fever when I was 12. I had no other family, so I worked odd jobs around Sacramento until a rancher named Thomas Dalton took me on as a hand. He taught me everything about cattle and horses, and when he moved his operation up here to the Sierra foothills, I came with him. Ethan poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks dancing upward. That was 12 years ago. I have been with the Dalton Ranch ever since. Do you like the work? I do. It is hard and the pay is modest, but I like being outside, working with animals. I like the solitude of the high country. He glanced at her with a slight smile. Though I admit, some days are more eventful than others. Faye found herself smiling back, a genuine expression that felt strange after the terror of the day. I suppose rescuing foolish women from floods is not your usual task. You are not foolish. Brave, perhaps to the point of recklessness, but not foolish. His gray eyes held hers for a moment longer than necessary, and Faye felt warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the fire. Tell me about Sacramento, Ethan said after a moment. What is your life like there? Faye described her life in the city, her work helping her father in his law office, her mother's involvement in various charitable organizations, the social events and church gatherings that filled her weeks. As she talked, she realized how constrained her world was compared to his, how her days were spent indoors amid papers and propriety, while he rode freely through mountains and valleys under open sky. "Do you ever wish for something different?" Ethan asked when she fell silent. "Sometimes," Faye admitted. "I love my father and respect his work, but copying legal documents and filing papers feels so small sometimes. I want to do something that matters, something that makes a real difference." She laughed self-consciously. "That probably sounds silly." "Not at all. Everyone wants their life to have meaning." Ethan stood and added another log to the fire. "You should try to sleep. Tomorrow will be a long day." Faye did not argue. The emotional and physical exhaustion of the day was catching up with her. She moved to the bunk while Ethan arranged blankets on the floor near the fire. She lay down fully clothed except for her boots, pulling the rough wool blanket up to her chin. "Ethan," she said into the darkness. "Yes?" "Thank you, not just for saving my life, but for being kind about it." "You are welcome, Faye." His use of her given name sent a small thrill through her. "Sleep well." Despite her exhaustion, sleep was slow to come. Faye lay listening to the crackle of the fire, and Ethan's steady breathing, her mind replaying the events of the day. When she finally drifted off, she dreamed of cold water and strong hands pulling her towards safety. She woke to the smell of coffee and weak sunlight filtering through gaps in the cabin's walls. Ethan was already up, dressed, and had the fire built up and coffee brewing. He looked over when she stirred. "Good morning. How do you feel?" Faye sat up carefully, assessing. Her body was sore in a dozen places, and she could feel the pull of scrapes and bruises she had not noticed yesterday. But overall, she felt remarkably well considering. "Better than I expected. What time is it?" "A bit past dawn. I have been out to check the creek. The water level dropped significantly overnight, though it is still running high and fast." He poured her a cup of coffee and brought it to her. "I am going to ride downstream and search for your mare. You should stay here where it is warm and safe." "I am coming with you," Faye said firmly, standing up. Her legs wobbled slightly but held. "That is not a good idea. You nearly died yesterday. You need rest. Those documents are my responsibility. I am coming with you." She met his gaze with determination, refusing to back down. Ethan studied her for a long moment, then shook his head with what might have been grudging admiration. "You are stubborn." "So, I have been told." Faye took the coffee from him, their fingers brushing again in that electrifying way. "Thank you." They ate a quick breakfast of more hardtack and jerky. Then Ethan saddled Duke while Faye put on her boots, which had dried by the fire overnight, though they were stiff and misshapen. Her dress and undergarments were still damp, so she kept wearing the borrowed clothes, rolling the excess fabric as best she could. Ethan helped her mount Duke, then swung up behind her. Having his arms around her as he guided the horse felt both appropriate and dangerously intimate. Faye tried to ignore the way her heart raced at his closeness as they rode out into the cool morning. The landscape was transformed by the snowmelt. Water ran everywhere, in rivulets and streams, pooling in low spots and turning the earth to mud. The main creek was indeed lower than yesterday, but still dangerous, a churning brown torrent that made Faye shudder to look at. They rode downstream along the bank, both of them scanning the area for any sign of her mare. They had gone perhaps 2 miles when Ethan suddenly reined Duke to a halt. "There," he said, pointing. Faye followed his gesture and saw a horse standing in a small clearing, head down, grazing on the winter grass. Her heart leaped. "That is her! That is Daisy!" Ethan guided Duke carefully toward the mare, speaking in low, soothing tones. Daisy raised her head and nickered nervously but did not bolt. As they drew closer, Faye could see the mare was scraped and muddy, but appeared otherwise unharmed. The saddle was still on her back, though it had twisted sideways, and miraculously, the saddlebags were still attached. Ethan dismounted and approached Daisy slowly, his hand outstretched. The mare snorted, but allowed him to catch her reins. He stroked her neck and spoke softly while examining her for injuries. "She seems all right, scratched up but nothing serious." He straightened the saddle and checked the girth, which had loosened. "Let me see the saddlebags." Faye slid down from Duke on her own, too impatient to wait for help. She reached for the saddlebags with trembling hands and opened the flap. The leather portfolio inside was soaked, and when she pulled it out, water streamed from it. "No," she whispered, opening the portfolio. The papers inside were wet but intact, the ink running in places but still mostly legible. "Oh, thank God, they are still here. Can they be saved?" Ethan asked, coming to stand beside her. "I think so. If we dry them carefully, most of the information is still readable. Father has copies of everything, so even if some details are lost, we can reconstruct them." Relief flooded through her so powerfully that her knees went weak. "This is better than I dared hope." "Then let us get them back to the cabin and spread them out to dry properly." Ethan took the portfolio from her and secured it in his own saddlebag. "Can you ride Daisy, or would you prefer to continue with me?" The question seemed innocent enough, but something in his tone made Faye wonder if he was hoping she would choose to stay with him. The thought sent a flutter through her stomach. "I should ride Daisy," she said, practical despite her inclinations. "The poor thing needs to know I am all right, and Duke has been carrying double." Ethan nodded and helped her mount her mare, his hands lingering on her waist a moment longer than necessary. Their eyes met, and Faye saw something in his gaze that made her breath catch. The ride back to the cabin was slower, with Daisy clearly tired and sore. When they arrived, Ethan helped Faye carefully remove each document from the portfolio and spread them on every available surface inside the cabin. The papers were legal claims, surveys, and deeds related to the mining company's property, all crucial to their case. "They need to stay flat while they dry, or they will curl and tear," Faye explained, adjusting one of the sheets. "It will take most of the day." "Then we have time," Ethan said. He had been standing in the doorway watching her work, and now he came to stand beside her. "Faye, I need to say something." She looked up at him, her heart suddenly pounding. "What is it? I know we only met yesterday, and under extraordinary circumstances, but I cannot stop thinking that perhaps it was meant to happen this way." He took her hand, his calloused fingers gentle around hers. "In one day, you have shown more courage and determination than most people show in a lifetime. You are educated and capable, but not arrogant about it. You treat me as an equal despite our different stations. I find myself not wanting to let you ride away to Sonora and out of my life." Faye felt tears spring to her eyes, but these were tears of joy rather than fear or frustration. "I feel the same way. I know it is too soon and probably foolish, but when you pulled me from that water, it felt like everything in my life shifted. You are the most genuine person I have ever met. Ethan, you do not hide behind pretense or social games. You simply are who you are, and I find that incredibly attractive." "Then let me court you properly," Ethan said, stepping closer. "Let me come to Sacramento and call on you. Meet your parents. Do things the right way." "Yes," Faye whispered. "I would like that very much." He raised her hand to his lips and kissed it softly, a gesture that was somehow both chaste and intensely romantic. Faye felt a warmth spread through her entire body, a sense of rightness she had never experienced before. They spent the rest of the day in the cabin, tending the papers and talking. Faye learned that Ethan had taught himself to read and write despite his lack of formal schooling, that he had a small savings, with which he hoped someday to buy his own land, that he loved the Sierra Nevada mountains with a passion that showed in every word he spoke about them. Ethan learned that Faye played piano, that she had once wanted to be a teacher, but her father needed her help, that she had never felt truly free until yesterday when she was fighting for her life in the water and realized how much she wanted to live. By late afternoon, the papers were dry enough to carefully stack. Faye examined each one, making notes about which information would need to be verified against her father's copies. Most of the documents were salvageable, which meant the mining company's claim could still be filed on time. "I should get you to Sonora," Ethan said as the sun began its descent toward the western peaks. "It is only a few hours' ride from here, and you need to deliver those papers." Faye nodded, though part of her wanted to stay in this cabin with him forever, isolated from the world and its expectations. But duty called, and she had never been one to shirk her responsibilities. They packed up carefully, making sure the documents were secure in an oilcloth Ethan found among the cabin supplies. Then they mounted their respective horses and set out towards Sonora, riding side by side through the afternoon light. The town of Sonora was bustling when they arrived as evening fell. Gold had been discovered here nearly 30 years earlier, and though the initial rush had faded, mining operations still drew people from all over. The main street was lined with businesses, saloons, and boarding houses, all busy with the day's final transactions. Ethan accompanied Faye to the offices of Consolidated Mining Company, where a clerk was just preparing to close for the day. The young man's eyes widened when Faye explained who she was and what she carried. "Miss Whitmore, we had given you up for lost. When you did not arrive yesterday, we feared the worst." He ushered them inside. "Please, let me get Mr. Henderson." The mine manager appeared moments later, a portly man in his 50s with a florid face and anxious expression. His anxiety transformed to relief when he saw the documents. "My dear young lady, you cannot imagine my concern. Your father sent a telegram saying you had departed on schedule, but when you did not arrive, I thought—" He shook his head. "But you are here and you have the papers. That is all that matters." Faye explained briefly what had happened, omitting only the most compromising details of her overnight stay with Ethan. Henderson listened with growing alarm. "You could have been killed. Your father will be beside himself when he learns of this." He took the documents from her and examined them carefully. "Some water damage, but everything is here and readable. Excellent work, Miss Whitmore, getting these here despite such adversity. We can file first thing tomorrow morning." "I did not do it alone," Faye said, gesturing to Ethan. "Mr. Zane saved my life. Without him, I would have drowned in that creek." Henderson turned to Ethan with newfound respect. "Then the mining company owes you a debt of gratitude, sir. Please, allow us to offer you a reward for your heroism." "That is not necessary," Ethan said quietly. "I did what anyone would do." "Nonsense. I insist." Henderson pulled out a wallet and extracted several bills. "At least allow us to cover your expenses and compensate you for your time." Ethan looked like he wanted to refuse, but Faye caught his eye and gave him a small nod. She knew his dream of owning land, and pride should not stand in the way of that dream. Reluctantly, he accepted the money with a quiet word of thanks. Henderson arranged for Faye to stay at the best boarding house in town, run by a respectable widow named Mrs. Chen. He also sent a telegram to her father in Sacramento, letting him know she had arrived safely. Ethan walked Faye to the boarding house, leading both horses through the darkening streets. At the door, they paused. Mrs. Chen had gone inside to prepare a room, giving them a moment of relative privacy. "I will need to return to the Dalton Ranch tomorrow," Ethan said. "But I meant what I said about courting you properly. May I write to you?" "Please do, and I will write back." Faye looked up at him, memorizing every detail of his face in the lamplight spilling from the boarding house windows. "When will I see you again? I will come to Sacramento in 2 weeks, when I have some time off, if that is acceptable to you." "It is more than acceptable." Faye glanced around to make sure they were unobserved, then rose on her toes and kissed his cheek quickly. "Thank you, Ethan, for everything." His hand came up to cup her face, his thumb brushing her cheekbone in a gesture of such tenderness that it made her breath catch. "Take care of yourself, Faye Whitmore, and do not try to cross any more flooded creeks." She laughed softly. "I promise." They stood there another moment, neither wanting to part, before the sound of Mrs. Chen's returning footsteps forced them to step apart. Ethan tipped his hat to the widow, gave Faye one last lingering look, and then walked away, leading Duke and Daisy. Faye watched until he disappeared into the darkness before turning to follow Mrs. Chen inside. The room was small but clean, with a comfortable bed and a washstand. Mrs. Chen brought her warm water and towels, clucking sympathetically when she heard a brief version of Faye's adventure. She also provided a nightgown and promised to have Faye's dress cleaned and dried by morning. Alone finally, Faye lay in the bed and stared at the ceiling, her mind too active for sleep, despite her exhaustion. Everything had changed in the span of 2 days. She had faced death, been saved by a stranger, and fallen in love. The last part should have frightened her with its suddenness, but instead, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. She thought about Ethan's gray eyes, his strong hands, his quiet competence. She thought about how he had treated her with respect and honor, even in circumstances that could have been compromised. She thought about his dreams of owning land and how her own constrained life in Sacramento suddenly felt like a cage. Sleep finally came, and with it dreams of mountains and rivers and a dark-haired cowboy with eyes like storms. The next week passed in a blur. Faye returned to Sacramento on the stage, her mission accomplished despite the near disaster. Her father was horrified when he heard the full story, but also incredibly proud of her resilience. Her mother was less sanguine about the whole affair, particularly when she learned that Faye had spent a night alone with a man, even under extenuating circumstances. "Your reputation could be ruined if this becomes known," Margaret Whitmore said, pacing the parlor of their comfortable home. "We must be very careful about how we discuss this." "Mother, I nearly died. Do you truly think I care about gossip?" Faye sat in her favorite chair by the window, watching the Sacramento streets below. "You should care. A young woman's reputation is everything. How will you make a good marriage if people believe you to be compromised?" "Perhaps I do not want the kind of marriage you envision for me." Faye turned to face her mother. "And perhaps I have already found the man I wish to marry." Margaret's eyes widened. "What are you saying?" "The cowboy who saved me, Ethan Zane. He is coming to call in a few days. I would like you and Father to meet him." "A cowboy?" Her mother looked aghast. "Faye, be reasonable. You cannot possibly be considering a future with a common laborer. You are educated, refined. You deserve someone of your own class." "Ethan is not common in any way that matters." Faye's voice was firm. "He is honest, brave, and kind. He saved my life without thought for his own. He treated me with perfect respect in circumstances where many men would have taken advantage. I know you value propriety and social standing, but I value character more." The argument continued for the better part of an hour before her father intervened. Gerald Whitmore had been listening from his study, and now he came into the parlor with his pipe and a thoughtful expression. "Margaret, let us meet this young man before we pass judgment. If he is truly as honorable as Faye believes, then I would like to shake his hand and thank him for saving our daughter's life. What happens after that, we shall see." 2 weeks after she left Sonora, a letter arrived for Faye in a careful, masculine hand. Her heart raced as she opened it and read Ethan's words. He wrote about his return to the ranch, the work he had been doing, his plans to visit Sacramento the following weekend. His prose was simple but sincere, and Faye found herself reading the letter multiple times, treasuring every word. She wrote back immediately, telling him about her safe return home, her father's gratitude, and her anticipation of his visit. She also warned him that her mother would likely be skeptical and advised him to be patient with her. When the day of his visit arrived, Faye was so nervous she could barely sit still. She wore her best dress, a deep blue silk that her mother insisted brought out her eyes, and arranged her blonde hair in an elaborate style that took her maid an hour to perfect. She felt ridiculous putting on such airs for Ethan, who had seen her soaking wet and wearing men's clothing, but she wanted her parents to see him in the best possible light. He arrived at precisely 2 o'clock, as his letter had promised. Faye watched from the upstairs window as he dismounted from Duke and tied the horse to their front rail. He wore clean trousers, a white shirt, a vest, and a jacket that looked new. His dark hair was neatly combed, and he had shaved. He looked impossibly handsome and also slightly uncomfortable, like a wild creature constrained by civilization. Faye rushed downstairs before the maid could answer his knock and opened the door herself. Ethan's face broke into a smile when he saw her. "Faye," he said softly, his gray eyes warm. "You look beautiful." "So do you. I mean, you look handsome. Very handsome." She was blushing and stammering like a schoolgirl, which only made her blush harder. He held out a small bouquet of wildflowers. "I know these are not as fancy as what you can buy in the city, but I picked them this morning in the high meadows. I thought you might like them." Faye took the flowers, tears suddenly stinging her eyes. The gesture was more romantic than a dozen roses from a shop. "They are perfect, thank you." She led him into the parlor, where her parents waited. Her father stood and extended his hand immediately. "Mr. Zane, I am Gerald Whitmore. I have been very anxious to meet the man who saved my daughter's life." They shook hands firmly. "Please, sit down." Margaret Whitmore remained seated, her posture stiff and her expression carefully neutral. "Mr. Zane," she said with a slight nod. "Mrs. Whitmore, thank you for receiving me in your home." Ethan sat in the chair Gerald indicated, his posture straight and his manner respectful, but not obsequious. The next hour was an interrogation disguised as polite conversation. Margaret asked about Ethan's background, his family, his education, his prospects. To his credit, Ethan answered every question honestly, never trying to make himself seem more than he was. He explained his orphan childhood, his lack of formal schooling, his work as a cowboy, his modest savings. Gerald, meanwhile, seemed more interested in the actual rescue. He wanted to know every detail of how Ethan had spotted Faye in the water, how he had managed to reach her, what condition she had been in. His questions came from genuine concern and gratitude, and Faye could see him warming to Ethan as they talked. "You risked your own life without hesitation," Gerald said finally. "That speaks to a man's character more than any pedigree or bank account." "I could not have lived with myself if I had not tried to help," Ethan said simply. "Anyone would have done the same. I suspect that is not true, but it says something admirable about you that you believe it." Gerald glanced at his wife, whose expression had softened slightly during the conversation. "Mr. Zane, my daughter tells me you would like to court her properly. Is that correct?" "Yes, sir. I know I am not what you probably envisioned for her. I have no education and no fortune, but I can promise to work hard, to treat her with respect and kindness, and to do everything in my power to make her happy." Ethan looked directly at Gerald as he spoke. "I love her, Mr. Whitmore. I know it seems too fast, but when you pull someone from death, you see them in a way most people never do. I saw her courage, her strength, her refusal to give up. How could I not love that?" Faye felt tears spill down her cheeks. She had not expected such a direct declaration, particularly not in front of her parents. Margaret looked stunned, while Gerald had a slight smile playing at his lips. "That is quite a speech, young man," Gerald said. "What do you say, Margaret?" Faye's mother was silent for a long moment, studying Ethan with an expression that was impossible to read. Finally, she said, "Mr. Zane, I will be honest with you. This is not the match I would have chosen for my daughter, but I can see that you care for her genuinely. And more importantly, I can see that she cares for you. Love is not always practical or convenient, but it is precious. I will not stand in your way, though I reserve the right to change my mind if you prove yourself unworthy of her. That is all I ask, Mrs. Whitmore." Ethan's relief was visible. "Thank you. However," Margaret continued, "a proper courtship requires time and supervision. If you are serious about my daughter, you will need to visit regularly, allow us to know you better, and demonstrate that this is not merely a passing infatuation born from dramatic circumstances. I understand completely. I will visit as often as my work allows, and I will do whatever is necessary to prove myself to you and to Faye." Gerald stood, signaling the end of the formal interview. "Then we have an understanding. Faye, why do not you show Mr. Zane the garden? Your mother and I have some matters to discuss." Faye practically leaped from her seat, and Ethan followed her out the back door into the small garden behind the house. It was nothing compared to the wild mountain meadows he knew, just a cultivated rectangle of roses and herbs surrounded by a white fence. But it was private. The moment they were out of sight of the house, Ethan pulled her into his arms and kissed her. It was their first real kiss, and it made Faye's head spin. His lips were warm and firm, moving against hers with a tenderness that belied his strength. She wrapped her arms around his neck and kissed him back with all the longing she had felt during their 2 weeks apart. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Ethan rested his forehead against hers. "I have been wanting to do that since the moment I pulled you from the water." "I have been wanting you to do that just as long," Faye whispered. "Ethan, I meant what I said in my letter. I do not care that you are not wealthy or that you lack formal education. You are worth 10 of the boring lawyers and businessmen my mother keeps trying to introduce me to. Your mother is not wrong to want more for you than a cowboy's uncertain life." He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs stroking her cheeks. "But I swear to you, Faye, I will work every day to build something better. I will buy land, build a home, create a life worthy of you." "You are already worthy of me," Faye said fiercely. "Do not let anyone tell you otherwise." They spent another hour in the garden, talking and stealing kisses when they were certain no one was watching from the house. Ethan told her about his plans, how he had been saving money for years and now had enough to put a down payment on a small parcel of land. The money from the mining company had pushed him over the threshold he needed. He had found a property near Sonora, 100 acres with good water and timber that the owner was willing to sell. "It is not much," he said, "but it is a start. I could run cattle there, maybe build it into something substantial over time. But it would be a hard life, Faye. Isolated and rough, at least at first. I do not know if I should even ask you to consider it." "Are you asking me to marry you?" Faye's heart was pounding. Ethan took both her hands in his. "Not yet. I want to do this properly. Give your parents time to accept me. Give you time to be certain. But yes, eventually, that is exactly what I want to ask you. Will you wait for me while I establish myself? It might take a year or more before I have something to offer you. I will wait as long as necessary, Faye said without hesitation. And in the meantime, I will help Father with his practice, save my own money, and learn everything I can about ranching and farming. When we do marry, I want to be a true partner to you, not just a burden. Ethan kissed her again, and Faye felt the promise of their future in that kiss, all the struggle and joy and love that awaited them. The following months passed in a pattern of longing and brief reunions. Ethan visited Sacramento once a month, sometimes twice if the ranch could spare him. Each visit followed the same pattern: formal time in the parlor under Margaret's watchful eye, followed by precious minutes alone in the garden where they could speak freely and share kisses that grew more passionate each time. Between visits, they wrote letters constantly. Faye learned about the progress Ethan was making on his land purchase, the negotiations with the owner, the plans he was drawing up for a house and barn. She told him about her work with her father, the cases she was helping research, the growing realization that she had a real aptitude for legal thinking. "Have you ever considered becoming a lawyer yourself?" Ethan wrote in one letter. "I know it is not common for women, but you have the mind for it, and times are changing." The suggestion planted a seed in Faye's mind. California had just admitted its first woman to the bar a few years earlier. It was not impossible, just difficult. She began researching what would be required, discreetly asking her father about the process. Gerald noticed her interest and brought it up one evening over dinner. "Margaret, I have been thinking, Faye has been invaluable to me in the office. She has a better grasp of contract law than some lawyers I know. What would you think about her pursuing formal legal education?" Margaret nearly dropped her fork. "Women lawyers? Gerald, that is radical even for you." "It is practical. Look at Clara Foltz, practicing law in San Jose. The world is changing, whether we like it or not. Why should Faye not be part of that change?" The discussion continued over several weeks, with Faye carefully building her case. She pointed out that she could practice law in Sacramento, that it would not prevent her from marrying and having a family, that it would give her useful skills no matter what her future held. Finally, to everyone's surprise, Margaret agreed. "If you are determined to marry a cowboy and live in the mountains, you may need something to fall back on," she said practically. "And I suppose I would rather have a daughter who is a lawyer than a daughter who is simply a cowboy's wife with no prospects of her own." It was not the most enthusiastic endorsement, but Faye took it. She began studying in earnest, reading law books late into the night, discussing cases with her father, preparing for the day when she could take the bar examination. Ethan was thrilled when she wrote to tell him. "You will be brilliant," he wrote back. "And when we have our ranch, you can use your skills to help other ranchers with their legal troubles. There is always need for someone who understands both the land and the law." His belief in her meant everything. The young men her mother had tried to match her with had always seemed threatened by her intelligence, wanting her to hide her abilities and play the delicate flower. Ethan celebrated her strength and encouraged her ambitions, seeing them not as competition, but as complementary to his own dreams. 8 months after their first meeting, Ethan sent word that he had finalized the purchase of his land and would be coming to Sacramento with important news. Faye's heart raced when she read the telegram. She knew what this meant. He arrived on a Saturday afternoon in November 1878, and Faye saw immediately that something had changed. He carried himself with a new confidence, the bearing of a man who owned something of his own rather than just working for wages. The whole family gathered in the parlor, even though Ethan had requested to speak with Gerald alone. Faye could not have stayed away for anything, and Margaret clearly felt the same. Ethan did not waste time with preamble. He looked directly at Gerald and said, "Mr. Whitmore, I have come to ask for your daughter's hand in marriage. I now own 100 acres of good land near Sonora, with a creek that never runs dry and enough timber to build a house and barn. I have plans drawn up for a comfortable home, and I have been saving money to furnish it properly. It will not be the life of luxury Faye could have had, but I promise she will never want for necessities, and I will love and cherish her every day of my life." Gerald looked at his daughter, who was barely breathing. "Faye, is this what you want?" "More than anything," she whispered. "Then you have my blessing, Mr. Zane, though I suspect you would have asked her anyway, even without it." Gerald's tone was wry but affectionate. Margaret dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. "I suppose it was inevitable." "Very well, Mr. Zane. but I insist on a proper engagement period, at least 6 months, to give us time to plan a wedding and for Faye to prepare her trousseau." "Of course, Mrs. Whitmore, whatever you think is appropriate." Ethan turned to Faye, his gray eyes shining. "Faye Whitmore, will you marry me?" "Yes," Faye said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, absolutely yes." He pulled out a small box from his pocket and opened it to reveal a simple gold band with a small but perfect sapphire. "I know it is not much, but the stone reminded me of the color of your dress the first day I came to call." "It is perfect," Faye breathed as he slipped it onto her finger. It fit perfectly, and she wondered how he had known her size. Later, she learned he had asked her maid to measure one of her other rings. The engagement period passed in a flurry of preparations. Margaret threw herself into planning the wedding with an enthusiasm that surprised everyone. She might have reservations about Faye's choice of husband, but she was determined that her only daughter would have a beautiful wedding regardless. Ethan traveled back and forth between his land and Sacramento whenever possible, sometimes staying with Thomas Dalton and his family when they came to the city on business. Dalton turned out to be a kind man in his 60s who spoke highly of Ethan's character and work ethic. He even offered to host the wedding at his ranch, since Ethan had no family of his own. "You have been like a son to me," Dalton told Ethan in front of the Whitmores. "It would be my honor to stand in for your father at your wedding." Ethan accepted with obvious emotion, and Faye saw her own father put a comforting hand on the younger man's shoulder in a gesture of solidarity. Meanwhile, Faye continued her legal studies with renewed focus. She wanted to take the bar examination before the wedding, to enter her marriage as a lawyer rather than merely a lawyer's daughter. Her father supported her completely, even helping her find a sympathetic attorney who agreed to sponsor her application. The examination was grueling. 3 days of written and oral questions covering everything from common law to the California Constitution. When it was over, Faye felt wrung out but cautiously optimistic. She had answered every question to the best of her ability, drawing on months of intensive study. The results came 2 weeks before her wedding. Faye had passed. She was now officially a lawyer, one of only a handful of women in California with that distinction. Ethan was in Sacramento when she received the news, and he swept her up in his arms and spun her around right there in the parlor, propriety forgotten. "I am so proud of you," he said, setting her down but keeping his arms around her. "My brilliant, beautiful, brave Faye. You are going to change the world." "I am just going to practice law," she said, but she was glowing with pride and joy. "You are going to be the first woman lawyer in the Sierra foothills," Ethan corrected. "That is changing the world, whether you call it that or not." The wedding took place on a perfect April day in 1879, 1 year and 1 month after Ethan had pulled Faye from the flooded creek. The ceremony was held at the Dalton Ranch, with a judge friend of Gerald's officiating. Faye wore a dress of ivory silk that her mother had commissioned from the finest dressmaker in Sacramento, and she carried a bouquet of the same wildflowers Ethan had brought her on his first visit. Ethan wore a new suit that Faye had insisted on buying him, though he looked slightly uncomfortable in such formal attire. But when he saw her walking toward him on her father's arm, his expression transformed into something so full of love that Faye felt tears spring to her eyes. The vows were traditional, but when Ethan said, "I do," his voice carried such conviction that there was not a dry eye among the guests. And when he kissed her as his wife for the first time, it felt like a promise of all the joy and adventure their future would hold. The reception was a mix of Sacramento society and rough cowboys, miners, and ranchers from Sonora and the surrounding area. The two groups mingled with surprising ease, united in their affection for the couple. Thomas Dalton gave a touching speech about watching Ethan grow from a lost boy into a fine man, and Gerald spoke about trusting his daughter's judgment, even when it took her in unexpected directions. As evening fell, Ethan and Faye slipped away from the party and rode out to the property that was now theirs together. Ethan had spent the past months building a house, and though it was small and simple compared to the Whitmore home in Sacramento, it was sturdy and well-made, with loving care evident in every detail. He carried her over the threshold as tradition dictated, and Faye looked around at what would be her new home. The main room served as kitchen and living area combined, with a stone fireplace, a table, and chairs Ethan had made himself, and a rocking chair that had been a wedding gift from the Daltons. A door led to a bedroom, and another to a small study. "I know it is not much," Ethan said, suddenly nervous, "but we can add on as we need to. I thought maybe the study could be your law office, at least to start." Faye turned to him, her eyes shining. "It is perfect. It is ours, and that makes it perfect." They made love for the first time that night, with moonlight streaming through the bedroom window and the sound of the creek bubbling outside. It was tender and passionate, occasionally fumbling as they learned each other's bodies, but always filled with love. Afterward, they lay tangled together, Ethan's hand resting on Faye's hip and her head on his chest. "Do you have any regrets?" he asked softly. "About leaving Sacramento, your parents, the life you could have had?" "Not even one," Faye said firmly. "This is exactly where I am meant to be, with you, building something new together. I would choose this 1,000 times over." The first year of marriage was both harder and more rewarding than either of them had anticipated. Running a ranch, even a small one, required constant work from dawn to well past dark. Ethan spent his days mending fences, tending to the small herd of cattle they had started with, clearing land for planting. Faye learned to cook on the wood stove, to tend a vegetable garden, to preserve food for the winter. Her hands, once smooth from city life, became calloused and strong. But she also set up her law practice, spreading word through the community that she was available to help with contracts, property disputes, and estate planning. The response was slow. At first, many people were skeptical of a woman lawyer, but gradually, clients began to come. A rancher needed help with a water rights dispute. A widow needed a will drawn up. A merchant wanted to contest an unfair contract. Each case Faye won added to her reputation, and by the end of that first year, she had a modest but steady practice. Ethan was her biggest supporter, proud of every victory and sympathetic through every setback. He built her a separate office when their one-room law practice proved too small, working by lamplight after his ranch chores were done to construct a small building, with a desk, chairs, and shelves for her growing library of law books. "You need a proper place to meet with clients," he said when he presented it to her on their first anniversary. "Something that shows you are a serious professional." Faye threw her arms around him, overwhelmed by his thoughtfulness. "I love you so much. Do you know that?" "I do," he said, kissing her deeply. "And I love you just as much. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Faye Zane." Their life fell into a comfortable rhythm. They worked hard during the week, but Sundays were sacred time for each other. They would ride up into the mountains together, exploring the high meadows, swimming in alpine lakes, making love under the open sky. Sometimes they would pack supplies and camp for a night or two, sleeping under the stars and talking about their dreams for the future. "I want children," Faye said one night as they lay in their bedrolls watching the Milky Way stretch across the sky. "At least 2, maybe more. I want them to grow up here, knowing this land, learning to work hard and appreciate beauty." "I want that too," Ethan said, rolling to face her. "I want to teach our sons to ride and rope, to respect the land and animals. I want to see our daughters grow up strong and capable like their mother." "What if our daughters want to be cowboys and our sons want to be lawyers?" Faye teased. "Then they will be the best cowboys and lawyers in California," Ethan said seriously. "I will never tell our children what they can or cannot be based on their sex. Not after watching you prove that women can do anything they set their minds to." 2 years into their marriage, Faye discovered she was pregnant. The news filled them both with joy and terror in equal measure. The nearest doctor was in Sonora, over an hour's ride away, and Faye had heard too many stories of women dying in childbirth in remote areas. Ethan immediately insisted they arrange for her to stay with her parents in Sacramento for the last month of her pregnancy and the birth itself. Faye initially protested, not wanting to leave the ranch or burden her family, but her practical nature won out. This was not about pride. It was about giving their child the best chance at life. Margaret Whitmore was overjoyed to have her daughter home, though she fussed constantly over Faye's obviously physical condition. "You are far too thin," she scolded. "Ranch life is too hard for a woman in your condition." "Mother, I am perfectly healthy. The doctor said so." Faye submitted to her mother's fussing with good grace, understanding that it came from love, even if it was overbearing. The baby came on a cold February night in 1881, after 12 hours of labor that left Faye exhausted but exhilarated. The baby was a boy, healthy and loud, with a shock of dark hair like his father's. Ethan had ridden through the night to be there when word reached him that labor had started. He arrived just as dawn was breaking, rushing into the bedroom still covered in trail dust. When Faye placed their son in his arms, tears streamed down his face. "He is perfect," Ethan whispered, staring down at the tiny bundle. "What should we name him?" They had discussed names endlessly, but never quite agreed. Now, looking at Ethan's face as he held their son, Faye knew exactly what she wanted. "Thomas," she said, "after Mr. Dalton. He gave you a home when you needed one. Now we are giving his name to our son." Ethan looked up at her, his gray eyes bright with emotion. "Thomas Gerald Zane, after both the men who have been fathers to us." Gerald, who had been waiting anxiously outside, was called in to meet his grandson and hear the name. He broke down completely, hugging both Ethan and Faye with uncharacteristic emotion. They stayed in Sacramento for another month while Faye recovered her strength, then returned to the ranch with baby Thomas bundled carefully in blankets. The homecoming was bittersweet. Faye had missed the ranch fiercely, but she was also terrified of raising an infant so far from help. Ethan seemed to sense her fear. "We will manage," he said firmly. "People have been raising babies in remote places since the beginning of time, and you are the strongest, most capable woman I know. Our son could not ask for a better mother." He was right. Faye adapted to motherhood with the same determination she brought to everything else. Thomas was a good baby, healthy and content, and Faye found she could still manage her law practice with him, sleeping in a cradle in her office or strapped to her back in a carrier Ethan fashioned from canvas and leather. As Thomas grew into a sturdy toddler, the ranch prospered. Ethan's careful stewardship and hard work paid off in a growing herd and improved pastures. Faye's law practice expanded, and she took on more complex cases, even traveling occasionally to argue before judges in larger towns. Her reputation spread throughout the region as a sharp legal mind who never backed down from a challenge. 3 years after Thomas's birth, a daughter arrived. They named her Eleanor, and she had her mother's blonde hair and her father's gray eyes. She was a fierce baby from the start, loud and demanding, and Faye often joked that Eleanor would probably be running the ranch by the time she was 10. Or arguing cases before the Supreme Court, Ethan countered. With her mother's stubbornness and her own considerable will, I would not bet against her. Life was full and busy, sometimes overwhelmingly so, but it was also rich with love and purpose. Faye would sometimes pause in the middle of a hectic day, children needing attention, legal briefs to write, ranch accounts to balance, and feel overwhelmed with gratitude for the path her life had taken. "Do you remember," she said to Ethan one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset while their children played in the yard, "when you pulled me from that creek, I was convinced I was going to die." "I remember." Ethan put his arm around her shoulders. "I remember thinking I had never seen anyone fight so hard to survive. I was fighting to live, but I had no idea what I was fighting for. I thought my life was my father's law practice and my mother's social calendar." She leaned into him, watching Thomas chase Eleanor around the oak tree they had planted the year they were married. "I had no idea I could have this. A partner who respects me, work that matters, children I adore, a home I helped build with my own hands. You did not just save my life that day, Ethan. You gave me a life worth saving." "We gave each other that," Ethan said, kissing the top of her head. "I was just existing before I met you, going through the motions. You made me believe I deserved more, that I could build something meaningful. Everything good in my life started the day I rode into that flood." They sat in comfortable silence, hands intertwined, as the sun painted the sky in shades of orange and gold. In the distance, the creek burbled over its rocks, the same creek that had nearly taken Faye's life, and instead had brought them together. The years continued to unfold with their mix of joy and challenge. They added 2 more children to their family, another son named James and a daughter named Rose. The house expanded with each new baby, growing from the simple cabin it had been into a proper home with multiple bedrooms, a large kitchen, and a separate parlor. Thomas grew into a natural cattleman, always at his father's side learning the ranching trade. Eleanor showed an early aptitude for legal thinking and would sit in her mother's office for hours, reading law books and asking surprisingly sophisticated questions. James loved working with horses and talked about breeding the finest stock in California. Rose, the youngest, seemed to have inherited the best traits of both her parents, her father's steady calm, and her mother's quick intelligence. The ranch continued to prosper. Ethan bought additional land when it became available, eventually expanding their original 100 acres to nearly 500. They employed several ranch hands, and during roundup seasons, the house would be full of cowboys eating Faye's cooking and telling stories around the dinner table. Faye's law practice evolved as well. She began taking on civil rights cases, defending Chinese immigrants who faced discrimination, representing Native Americans in land disputes, fighting for women who were denied their legal rights. She did not always win, but she built a reputation as a fierce advocate for the underserved, and her office was often filled with clients who could not afford to pay but desperately needed help. "We can afford it," Ethan would say whenever she worried about taking on too many pro bono cases. "The ranch provides more than enough. You use your gifts where they are needed most." On their 10th wedding anniversary, Ethan surprised Faye with a trip back to the place where they met. They left the children with the Daltons and rode out to the creek, which was running high again with spring snowmelt, though not as dangerously as that fateful day. "I wanted to come back here," Ethan said, as they stood on the bank, "and remember how it all started. Every year I thank God that I was riding this way, that I saw you in the water, that I was able to reach you in time. What are the odds of all those things aligning perfectly?" "I used to think it was just luck," Faye said, taking his hand. "But now, I think it was meant to be. We were meant to find each other, meant to build this life together. I cannot imagine any other path that would have made me this happy. I love you, Faye Zane. I loved you the moment I saw your courage as you fought that current. I loved you when you insisted on coming with me to find your horse even though you could barely stand. I loved you when you stood up to your mother about courting me. I have loved you every day since, and I will love you every day that remains to us. And I love you, Ethan Zane, my rescuer, my partner, my best friend, the father of my children, the love of my life. Thank you for riding through that water. Thank you for being brave enough to pull me out. Thank you for everything that came after." They made love there on the creek bank, in the same spot where he had first carried her to safety, reclaiming the place that might have been her grave and transforming it into a celebration of their love and life together. As they grew older, their love only deepened. Gray appeared in Ethan's dark hair and lines formed around Faye's eyes, but when they looked at each other, they still saw the young people they had been, her fighting the water with all her strength, him riding fearlessly into danger to save her. Thomas eventually took over the primary management of the ranch, allowing Ethan to slow down, though he never fully retired. He would ride the property every day until he was well into his 70s, checking on cattle and fences, unable to break the habits of a lifetime. Eleanor went to law school in San Francisco, becoming one of the first women to graduate from the program, then returned to Sonora to practice with her mother. Together, they established the first all-woman law firm in the Sierra foothills, taking on cases that male lawyers would not touch and winning far more often than they lost. James did indeed become a horse breeder of considerable renown, his animals sought after throughout California for their quality and temperament. Rose married a teacher and moved to Sacramento, where she opened a school for girls that focused on academic rigor rather than just the domestic arts. The ranch that Ethan and Faye built became a fixture of the community, known for its honest dealings and its owner's generosity. When times were hard, they extended credit to struggling neighbors. When disasters struck, they were first to offer help. The legacy they created was about more than just land and cattle. It was about character and community. On a warm September evening in 1915, 37 years after Ethan had pulled Faye from the water, they sat together on their porch, as they had done thousands of times before. They were both in their 60s now, their children grown with families of their own, their grandchildren running wild through the house during Sunday dinners. "Do you have any regrets?" Faye asked, the same question he had posed to her on their wedding night so many years ago. Ethan took her hand, his grip still strong despite his age. "Not a single one. Every choice I made led me to you, and you led me to this life. How could I regret any of it?" "I feel the same way." Faye leaned her head on his shoulder, comfortable in the silence between them. "I was so frightened that day in the water. I thought I was dying, and all I could think about was how much I had left undone, how I had never really lived. And then you came, and you saved me, and I got to live more than I ever dreamed possible." "We saved each other," Ethan said. "You saved me just as much as I saved you. Before you, I was just drifting, working and saving, but never really living either. You gave me purpose and love and a family. You made me better than I ever thought I could be." They sat together as the sun set behind the mountains. painting the sky in brilliant colors, the creek singing its eternal song in the distance. Their life together had been everything a life should be, full of love, hard work, challenges overcome, children raised, dreams achieved. It was not a fairy tale existence, but it was real and earned and infinitely precious. Years later, when both of them had passed and their children gathered to remember them, the stories told were always the same. The dramatic rescue that brought them together, the unlikely courtship that defied social conventions, the partnership that built something lasting from nothing, the love that never wavered through decades of life's inevitable ups and downs. But the story that Eleanor told most often, the one that never failed to make her weep even in her own old age, was simpler. She remembered being a little girl, perhaps 5 or 6, waking early one morning and wandering out to the porch. There she found her parents sitting together, watching the sunrise. Her father had his arm around her mother, and her mother's head rested on his shoulder, and neither of them said a word. They just sat there in perfect contentment, and Eleanor had understood even then that this was what love looked like. Not grand gestures or dramatic declarations, but two people choosing each other every single day, finding peace and joy in simple presence. That was the legacy Ethan and Faye Zane left behind, not just a successful ranch or a groundbreaking law practice or wonderful children, but a model of what a true partnership could be. They showed everyone who knew them that love could be found in the most unexpected places, that it could survive and thrive despite obstacles, and that it could build something beautiful and lasting. The creek where they met still runs high every spring, the snowmelt rushing down from the mountains just as it did that day in 1878. Sometimes, on quiet evenings, if you stand very still beside the water, you can almost see them there, a dark-haired cowboy on a black horse, riding fearlessly into the current to pull a young woman from death's grip, and in that moment, creating not just a rescue, but a love story that would endure for generations. Their ranch still stands, now owned by Thomas's great-grandchildren, and the law offices that Faye and Eleanor founded have expanded into a full firm that still takes on pro bono cases for those who cannot afford representation. The Zane family name remains synonymous with integrity and community service throughout the Sierra foothills. But more than any material legacy, what Ethan and Faye left behind was the knowledge that one moment of courage can change everything, that true love is built through countless small choices and daily acts of kindness, and that sometimes the best lives are not the ones we plan, but the ones we build together after fate intervenes. They had been two people alone, struggling in their separate ways, until a spring flood brought them together. From that terrifying moment in icy water grew a love that warmed and sustained them through nearly 4 decades of marriage, that produced children and grandchildren who carried their values forward, that touched countless lives through their work and generosity. In the end, their story was simple. He rode through rising water and pulled her out, but they saved each other in every way that mattered. They built a life together from nothing but love and hard work, and they proved that sometimes the most unlikely beginnings lead to the most beautiful endings. Their love story started with a rescue, but it became so much more a testament to courage, commitment, and the transforming power of love.